Good morning, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the Mesa City Council study session for April the 12th. We don't have any of our, either Mr. Whitaker or Mr. Thompson on the telephone, I believe, do we?
Yes, Mayor, I'm here.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, Kevin. Is that Kevin?
Yes.
Okay, how about Jeremy? Oh, okay. Jeremy will be here in just 1 minute, I understand. So, Kevin, good to hear your voice. I know you're recovering from some surgery earlier this week. We're all, you're in our prayers, and good to hear your voice.
Thank you, Mayor.
The first item on the agenda for this meeting is to review the items on the agenda for the April 16th council meeting. So, council, if you'd please refer to that document. I'm going to resist the urge to read through it while everybody reads it. No bingo applications this week, unfortunately. There is a few liquor license applications. Mr. Thompson, do you want to say anything about agenda item 4H? That's something I know you've worked hard on.
Yes, Mayor. That's something that we challenged staff to do right after I was elected. And I tell you, I can't be more happier than to see Elliott Road get that widened out for the citizens that live out in the far southeast part of our district.
Thank you. So that's the road improvements to the Elliott Road Tech Corridor. We've talked about with some some monuments out in front to kind of brand the neighborhood.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions, council? So currently, there is nothing off of the consent agenda. We'll see if that remains the case. The next item on our agenda for this meeting is item 2A, which is to hear a presentation and discuss the proposed 2018 bond sales and utility defeasance. Welcome our financial team this morning.
Good morning, Mayor, council members. My name is Mike Kennington. I'm the Chief Financial Officer, and with me is Ryan Wimmer, our Deputy Director in our Office of Management and Budget. It's great to see you this morning as it's this time of year that we come before you to discuss new money bond issuances. And on the agenda for your consideration on Monday, as you saw, there are 3 resolutions. 2 of them deal with new money bond issuances, and the other for a bond defeasance. And at this moment, I'll let Ryan take you through an overview of those 3 items.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. First, we'll discuss as Mike said, there's 3 items. There's 2 new money sales and then a defeasance. So first, we'll talk about the new money sales. We typically sell annually each year, so this is the anticipated 2018 sale. Or sales. The timeline for those sales is, as we talked about on Monday, you'll consider authorizing those 2 issuances of new money bonds. On April 18th, the city staff will talk to the rating agencies. We receive bond ratings from S&P and Moody's, so two of the 3 major rating agencies. And then on the 15th of May, we expect to price the bonds. So conditions in the bond market that day will determine the pricing we get on the bonds. The interest rates we pay. And then on June 4th, the city will close the new money bonds, meaning we'll finalize the sale and receive the proceeds. So issuing bonds, Mesa voters authorized bonds to finance capital infrastructure projects. The city's had most recently bond elections in 2012, 2013, and 2014, and that's mostly what we're issuing this year is authorization from those years. The city's CIP, the capital improvement program that you've been seeing through the budget process, is primarily funded through bonds. And we look at how much to sell and if we need to sell at all, each type of bond each year. We evaluate that on an ongoing basis. And the amount that we sell each year is enough. We try to sell based on the calendar year. So think of it as we're selling the bonds we either have used this calendar year in 2018, or we plan to use by the end of December. So towards the beginning of the year, we actually spend into the negative in these bond funds, and then we are allowed to reimburse ourselves halfway through the year, and then we plan to get to zero by the end of the year. And the next year we would do the same thing. The structure of the new bonds is incorporated into existing debt to maintain a consistent structure and smooth utility rates. And we'll look at that in a minute, but there's existing debt that we take into account when we structure the new debt. This year, the GO issuance is fairly small. The proposed issuance is only $16 million of Parks and Street bonds. The public safety authorization has been exhausted, so there's no more public safety bonds we're issuing. And the utility revenue bond issuance this year has all 5 utilities. It's normal to have water, wastewater, natural gas. Solid waste is somewhat atypical, but that's for the household hazardous waste facility that's being built right now. And you can see a little bit of detail on the general obligation bond issuance. That $16.1 million is of the 51 million in available authorization. We're selling 61, so we'll have about 35 million left after this issuance of existing authorization. And the projects being funded by this bond issuance examples are Eagles Park, Mesa Drive Phase 2, and the Elliott Road along the technology corridor. The structure of the general obligation bonds, you can see that here. And moving on to the utility systems revenue bonds issuance of $125 million. As you see, most of the years we're issuing, the authorization years are, most of it's 2014. There's a little 2010, and 1994 is that solid waste authorization. Authorization never expires, so it can always be used as long as indefinitely. There's no expiration on it. And you can see after this issuance, there's about $280 million left of authorization. About half of that is in wastewater, and most of that is that greenfield water wastewater reclamation plant expansion that is just ramping up right now. Examples of this issuance, the big ones are the Signal Butte water treatment plant. That's, as you know, going to be completed next month, and they've been working fast and a lot on that project. The Greenfield wastewater reclamation plant is in the beginning stages of construction, and the solid waste household hazardous waste facility is being constructed. Here you see the structure of the utility in orange, the new debt, and the existing debt in blue for utility systems bonds. So the kind of tricky word, or it sounds a little tricky, but it's really not too much so. This defeasance, a key to understanding what a defeasance is, you can't just pay off future debt when you have the money with municipal bonds. You have to wait until the debt becomes due or callable. And callable is just a feature in bonds where you can pay it off early as of a certain date. So on a 20-year bond, you might have a 10-year call feature. So after 10 years, you can go ahead and call the bonds and pay it off early. So when we talk about defeasing, and I'm just going to read this definition, to defease is to eliminate debt by setting aside the amount of cash that, along with interest earnings, exactly pays for the debt when the bonds reach the due or call date. So in this case, we have impact fee revenue that can only be used by law for eligible debt. There's certain projects that can be paid for with impact fee revenue. We have more impact fee revenue. We have a lot right now because of all the development going on, and we have very little eligible debt. And so we have this impact fee revenue building up, and so in order to remove that debt from our books, we put the cash that we have, impact fee revenue cash that we have in escrow, and it earns interest, and it just pays off the debt when it becomes due or callable. And that way, the advantage is noted at the bottom. The city can remove this debt from our financial statements, and we do earn a little bit more when we lock it up in escrow than we would in our city investments, which are fairly short term, just because of the longer term on the investments. And so this year, the defeasance we're proposing is to redeem early $15.2 million of utility systems revenue bond principal using that development fee revenue that's accrued to the city. Thank you, Mayor. That's our presentation.
Thank you very much.
And sorry, let me just mention for the council and for the public, there's behind, in the back of the presentation, there's a series of slides with additional information on the city's debt financing program that you might find interesting.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure how serious you were when you said that, but I actually did review them last night, and they were interesting. Yeah, so thank you. Council, any questions for these gentlemen?
Mayor, can I, so as we've mentioned in the past, and are working diligently to manage our enterprise fund, both as we've experienced higher than anticipated growth. The other side we've been working on is trying to manage our expenses, and this bond defeasance is one of the tools that I want to express appreciation to the staff as well as our financial advisors, always looking at ways to help us mitigate against these costs, especially the debt costs into the future. So this is an effective way for us to continue to bring costs down in the enterprise fund over a long period of time. And we'll continue to look at the opportunity for any kind of debt relief. We think there may be opportunities in the coming years where we can adjust our debt obligations. A lot of that will be dependent on what the market is at the time, but we're always evaluating the opportunities to refinance, restructure our debt in order to reduce our costs. But this is just another example of how we've been able to do that.
Quick question. It seems like this is a rather unique situation because of the impact fee scenario that you described earlier. That it's not a problem we typically have of having money that we need to apply to debt, right? It's usually we're anxiously waiting for that money to come in. So is there another scenario like this where we can't, and I know in the last tax reform, federal tax reform legislation, we actually lost some of our ability to refinance our bonds. So is this going to become a less and less good news situation where you guys come in and say, hey, we just saved ourselves some money by refinancing some bonds?
Mayor, thankfully, you're correct. They eliminated the availability of advance refunding so that, as Ryan said, these bonds that we issue may have a 10-year call option or feature. And in the past, we were able to advance refund those. That means prior to the 10th year, we were able to refund those monies because the rates were so good. You could put them in escrow, the refunding bonds, and they would pay off those bonds before they got to the 10th year. We're not allowed to do that anymore, but we still are able to do a current call option. So in the next several years, we have bonds that are going to become callable. 2009 bonds, 2010 bonds, they'll become callable in 2019, 20, and 21. So we do have those to look forward to depending on the market conditions, as Mr. Brady said. So we may have good news in the future.
Great. Thank you. Council, any additional questions? All right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is 2B, which is to hear a presentation and provide direction on the police department budget. It's good to have our police administration with us. Chief Batista, welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Council, Mr. Brady and Council staff, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you the Mesa Police Department.
You're on 55 North Center Street, Mesa, Arizona.
Now that we know where we are.
There's an icebreaker for you. I don't think it's done talking.
It is.
Okay.
If there's any questions, we'll just ask Siri.
Yes.
Right, okay.
What should my budget be? I'm Ramon Batista. I'm the police chief for the city of Mesa. To my left is Assistant Chief Sherry Burlingame. To my right, our budget director, budget manager, Ms. Krista York. And to her right, Assistant Chief Ken Cost. So today we're presenting the fiscal 2018-2019 budget presentation. I'll touch on the vision and the mission. I'll tell you, when I got here 9 months ago, there was no need for me to rebrand or re-message what we believe in. Excellence in public safety and excellence in everything that we do. We start off by having a partnership with the community. We ensure that we treat people right. We build trust. We show respect. And we always preserve human rights. I'll touch on our values because I think that they're very important. I'll tell you that to the Mesa citizens, I promise you that we will continue to find a diverse, qualified workforce focused on protecting our individual human rights, and first and foremost to us, the importance of defending the Constitution. To our employees, I'll tell you that we have the very best employees, and we will always treat them with respect, and we will always treat them fairly. Without our employees, the calls don't get answered and the cars don't run. And excellence, and as I mentioned earlier, excellence in everything that we do. And accountability. We hold ourselves accountable, and our values are grounded in honesty, integrity, and professionalism. And now before I turn the page and start the presentation, let me say that through the ebb and flow of the presentation, there are going to be many opportunities where we will look at each other or one another, ourselves included, and we will highlight the fact that there are areas that we need to get better at. But without a doubt, I'll tell you that as the newcomer, 9 months here, we have an outstanding police department. And it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because of the decisions that you made, about the painful periods that you endured, but the careful planning that went throughout to create the situation that we're in today, in which Mesa is a very, very safe city. So to that, I want us to not forget that we have an outstanding police department in this community. So on we go. So Mesa is part of the Major City Chiefs Police Association, 77 of the largest police departments in the country. Regularly, our police department is classified, our city is classified as one of the safest cities in the country. And to that, I'll highlight some of the statistics. The most pertinent one that comes to mind is property crimes, where we had a reduction of 4.7% from 2016 to 2017. That alone resulted in over 500 fewer victims. And so why is that important? And I'll tell you, property crimes in any community is something that tears at the fabric of the feeling of safety. If you own a family-owned business and you're in a strip mall and you worry about your clientele, you worry about people being able to visit your business, something that can draw away from that is the feeling of safety. Thievery, people breaking into cars in those areas make it so that perhaps that business may not be visited as often. And those things are a concern to me. It is a personal crime when somebody breaks into your car, when somebody breaks into your home. And so that's why it's important for us to highlight the fact that at this police department, we are still very, very focused on property crimes, and we will never take our eye off it. While every day I think about public safety as a whole, violent crime is important, our effort to continually reduce and attack those engaged in thievery and property crime is very, very important to the community as a whole. So I'll touch on our citywide calls for service. You can see that the trend line going back to 2013 has us at about 164,000 dispatch calls for service. And that continues through 2015, but then you see a jump of 10,000 calls for service between 2015 and 2017. Now, we've examined the first quarter of 2018 and compared it to the first quarter of 2017. And I can tell you that we're in the range of 1,500 to 2,000 calls ahead of the same period last year. Next. Let me talk about Part 1 crimes. And while here it's important to note that in 2017 we had 2,047 events of violent crime, what is most important is that we look at the parts that say at the lower right, 4.25 per 1,000 residents. And this involves violent crime involving homicide, sex assault, robbery, ag assault. These are the types of crimes that have a long-lasting and personal impact on any one of us, our families included. Again, what I've done here is highlight the fact that we're at 4.25 per 1,000. I looked at the 20 closest cities that match us in size of population, in size of the police department. And I sorted those cities by the number of violent crime events. And out of 20 cities, we were at the very bottom of that list. We were the safest out of 20 cities. And so what does that number look like, 4.25, in comparison to other cities? It ranges all the way from five persons per 1,000, 5 events, 5 persons per event per 1,000, all the way up to 18. Imagine that, out of 20 cities. 20 cities our size or slightly bigger, we're at the lowest end of that. Next. Property crimes, which I touched on earlier. This is another area where I made the same comparison. In 2017, we were at 10,692 events, which equates to 22.2 per 1,000. Again, looking at the same 20 cities, same population, police department size, we ranged from that number all the way up to 68.6 events per 1,000. Again, showing that we are doing really, really well in property crimes. But it's not happening in a vacuum. There are so many things that go into how that happens. We are still one of the few police departments in the country that uses the crime lab and forensics to go after property crime violations. So if we get fingerprints or we get DNA hits, we go back and we figure out who done it, and we go out and look for them and arrest those perpetrators. Next.
Mayor, if I could.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Thompson. Go ahead.
Chief, how are our Part 1 crimes, what's the biggest difference between our Part 1 crimes and non-index crimes when it comes to stolen property, vandalism, things like that?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Thompson, could you repeat the question?
When you're looking at property crimes, how is the property crimes, Part 1 property crimes, how is that different from your non-index crimes like, the stolen property, vandalism, and things like that? Or are they one and the same?
I don't have that information right in front of me right now, but I can get that for you.
Okay.
Part 1, a degree of, what is that? That's not all-inclusive of all property crimes, is it? Is there are different levels of property crimes? Maybe is that the question?
You'll have your Part 2
Okay.
crimes,
So
and
is
those
that-
are things like the vandalism, criminal damage.
Okay.
Things
So maybe
like
that's
that.
the question is, maybe you can
DUIs.
get back to us about
The difference
between
between
Part 1 and Part 2 as far as the statistics. Does that make
Yes.
sense? Okay. Maybe that is, I don't know if Councilman Thompson, if that would help answer your question?
Yeah, I think so, because I'm looking at, more of the criminal type damage, or the rash of B&Es that we're having on vehicles out the Southeast Valley to property and different things like that. So I'm just trying to get a feel for where we are in comparison to other cities.
So, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Thompson, when you're talking about B&E, you're talking about vehicle break-ins, that falls under property crimes, and that is the statistic that I'm talking about, where we fall at the very lowest end of the spectrum in that respect. Criminal damage would fall under Part 2 crimes, but when it comes to thievery, vehicle break-ins in neighborhoods, that falls under property crimes, as well as burglaries, shoplifting, et cetera.
Okay, perfect.
Next slide. So here we're looking at the overall reduction of Part 1 crimes. And although the chart starts off at 2013, I can tell you that we have looked at this from 2011 to 2017. We've had a total of 4,200 fewer victims of Part 1 crimes. And that's significant. 4,200 fewer victims of Part 1 crimes from 2011 to 2017. Next. So I've highlighted the reduction in Part 1 crimes. I also want to talk about our community engagement efforts. It includes a multitude of community forums, neighborhood block watch, school resource officers, our business community and our clergy partnerships, our relationship with our mental health community, our domestic violence outreach, our neighborhood events, in our outreach to the veterans and homeless who suffer from mental illness. Here, as of late, we've assigned officers to the Boys and Girls Club, and to date, these efforts are very successful. And we've got volunteer activity that goes unnoticed. So at the table with me, I have Chief Burlingame and Chief Cost, both of which spend time coaching and mentoring young kids in soccer and football and high school. And all of this is what makes up the Mesa Police Department. In the past year, we deployed squad-based advanced officer training. The benefits of that are that we are not spending additional overtime. We're training our officers at the districts within their squads, and so far that has been very successful. Thanks to the mayor, we were able to deploy naloxone, Narcan, which helps in the reversal of opioid overdoses, and first aid kits. With respect to the naloxone, we had a life-saving event 1 hour after it was deployed by an officer. So we know that these two programs are going to save lives. And not last, but active shooter training. Our relationship between the police and fire with respect to mass casualty training is in response to what we saw in Las Vegas and Parkland, Florida. And lastly, civilization of mid-management positions. Our police department should be a model nationwide for how well we find a balance between sworn and professional staff. And we continue to do that not only through our mid-management positions, but our lower line levels.
I'm sorry, Chief, Mr. Luna.
Thank you, Mayor. Would you speak a little bit about your community engagement? Yeah, I know that you're working with many of our minority communities. How is that going? Are you feeling that you're getting some, is that beneficial in terms of trying to mitigate any potential negative activity or crime?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Luna, absolutely. We have stepped up our effort to meet more regularly with the minority members of our community. We had an event at a local supermarket just a few weeks ago that was a huge success and lays the groundwork for more events in the future. Last year, Mr. Freeman asked about whether or not we were going to engage in surveys to take the temperature of the community and how we felt. And I'll tell you that we are going to do the surveys in a traditional form, but I think what's more important to me is the person-to-person communication and contact that I have and the questions that I ask people when they don't know that they're talking to the police chief. And I ask them about their interaction with the police department and how did it go. And I often find that people feel they were treated fairly and they were treated with respect. And that will never stop. We're going to continue to work towards that because without that trust, we can't do our work.
And just to follow up, what about your SRO officers in the schools? How is that working?
We continue to have a grant by the Arizona Department of Education that funds 10 SROs. We are paying out of our own budget for 4 SROs. I've engaged in early discussions with the Gilbert Public School District in order to help us with additional funding. Next. So we're going to talk about our current staffing challenges. I'm going to talk about the relationship between the calls and the population and the time that we're spending on calls. And let me spend just a little bit of time talking about that. So what we noticed is that from 2011 to 2017, our officers are spending on average 15 to 16 minutes more per call. And we know what it is. We have given them additional administrative duties that police officers in the past didn't have. Axon camera, booking forms that are online, things that are meant to ensure transparency and at the same time ensure that other processes flow smoothly, inevitably cause us to spend more time on calls. We're also responding to a lot more calls involving those suffering from mental illness, and those calls inevitably take a lot more time to resolve. I'm also going to talk about the needs that we have respective to our investigative needs. We've done a terrific job, I think, of putting forth a uniformed force that the community and everyone feels safe. We know that we have officers in the field, but it's come at a cost. And the cost is those investigative units that work behind the scenes to solve a homicide, to solve a sex assault, to solve your burglary. That's where we've taken a hit in order to maintain that front-facing force that provides that safety. In addition to that, there's administrative staff, non-sworn positions that we need in order to maintain our Axon program. That is an area that we are gearing up to reevaluate what we do and how we do it, but those are critical needs that we need to address. And lastly, with respect to mental health, and Chief Burlingame is going to touch on this later on, we are dealing with more and more folks in our community that are suffering from mental illness. And those calls have taken us in a path where we've had to employ deadly force. And we want to do everything we can ahead of those events in order to provide the services and the care that some of the folks in our community need. And that continues to be one of the struggles for us as an organization. This is a snapshot of our staffing. And so I want you to focus on fiscal year 13-14 in comparison to fiscal year 17-18, where we went from 782 to 752. Now, in the process of that, we carefully balanced the needs. We found a way to increase the number of non-sworn positions in order to help us achieve the mission. And as you can see, and as I mentioned earlier, we have an outstanding ratio of sworn to professional staff of 63 to 37%. Again, that should be we should be a national model for how that's done. When I talked about those 20 cities and those 20 police departments earlier, there's actually only one police department out of those 20, including ours, there was another one, that had that type of balance. Every other department is still following the traditional model that is pretty heavy on the sworn side, and then the support staff comes in after that. Only one other police department in the country that I looked at had the kind of balance that we have today. The next slide talks about our staffing in a graph model. And what's important about this is I want to point out that although our staffing number says 752, we actually have 607 actual police officers. When I say actual, I mean the officers that are taking calls. 330 of them are taking calls, and 257 of them are in the background. They're the SROs, they're the traffic officers, they're the pilots, they're the detectives in the background making sure that we can solve cases. And then we have an additional 145 sergeants, lieutenants, commanders, assistant chiefs, and chiefs. This is a snapshot of our patrol shift bid positions. And as you can see, in our effort to ensure that there's a public face of safety, uniformed officers, we've been able to increase from 306 in 2013 to 330 in 2017. And again, it's come at an impact. And the impact is that in some cases, we have to seriously reevaluate which cases we investigate and where can we have the opportunity to make the best use of our resources. So financial crimes, for example, we may have to reevaluate what crimes we look at and what thresholds we use in order to investigate a fraud case. And there again, it is challenging to maintain the level of service that we're maintaining now with the folks that are in the background that do the legwork to solve these crimes.
Mayor and Council, can I quickly also just, if you go back to the previous slide, like in 13-14, see the 782, and you come back to this slide again, the shift bid positions at 306. The other part of that story is sometimes I hear a lot of quotes about how we've lost so many officers from the prior years. The reality is the 782 is a budgeted number. It was not actually the number of officers that were on the payroll. It was an authorized position. So not all those positions were hired or filled. And that's manifest by that 306 number that you see after that. So while we had an authorized position of 782, we probably never, all those positions were never filled. A lot of times they were vacant for a variety of reasons during the year. We've tightened the number up so the difference between the authorized position and the positions that are actually filled every year are more in line with each other. And there was just a lot of, people retiring or leaving, that would cause a lot of those vacancies. But that's why there's a big swing between the 782 and the 306, is just because there really wasn't 782 officers with the city. That was just a number that was in a budget book, but it wasn't actually the number that was either funded or filled. Today, we can probably tell you that number is much, the difference between what is authorized and what is filled, and I think the chief's going to talk a little bit more about that, how we've really been able to make sure that we're able to keep that level of staffing constant throughout the year.
The next slide talks about our separation summary. And what I want to highlight here is that we've had consistent separation numbers, and we've been tracking this for a long time. We had an anomaly in 16-17 when there were only 32 total separations and retirements. But as you can see, we are actually on track with 44 in 14-15, 48 in year 15-16, and 49 in 17-18.
So it's not a dramatic difference from your prior years. I know we've been told that maybe there was something happening unique this year, but it's a little bit higher than average, but it's not completely out of line.
So,
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Thompson.
So Chief, the fact that that one of our academy classes was canceled last year, how is that going to impact these numbers versus your staffing, your staffing level versus those that are dropping? So, because there's going to be that lag in there where we're not going to fill, or we're not going to have the personnel to fill those vacancies by those that are separating. So how are we going to approach that to ensure that we continue to have enough officers on the street to protect our citizens?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Thompson, I'll say that that this is very, very important that I address this issue, and I'm glad that you brought up the question. Ms. York had the opportunity to attend the financial managers meeting for the Major City Chiefs Association. Again, 77 of the largest police departments in the country. And we were the only department at the time, which is last year, that were able to talk about the fact that we work in concert with the City of Mesa and the budget department to carefully forecast, accurately forecast the number of folks that we know are in the drop system that are going to be scheduled to retire. And we track back the number of folks that have separated or retired over a month-to-month period. And so that we are able to hire folks, train them, put them into the academy, and through that 11 months that it takes for them to get hired, we are actually almost right on target with the people that are coming out of training and the people that are retiring. And that program is unique to the City of Mesa. When Ms. York spoke about it, everybody looked at the table, looked at her and said, wow, that's amazing. We're going to take that back and see if we can work with our management, our budget office, to do the same thing. Again, it's a huge benefit.
So, Mayor and Council, what we call that is we call it as an overhire program, which means in the past, we would not allow the department to create an academy and start with cadets in the academy because they would be counted towards the total number of officers. Today, we allow for anticipating and working with the police department, anticipating vacancies during the year. We actually allow we overhire, but meaning that the officers that are in the academy are above and beyond the authorized positions. Am I saying that right? And we do that so that we have essentially, we have I don't want to use the word surplus, but we have a
Pipeline.
pipeline. We have a group of officers that are in training that that are above and beyond the numbers you see that are the authorized sworn. So when a sworn position leaves, we are ready to fill that position very soon during the academy, as they come out of the academy. So when we canceled an academy, that's really didn't affect this idea that we're able to replace and bring somebody out of the academy in anticipation of a retirement happening. Am I saying that right, Chris? Maybe.
Absolutely. Mr. Brady, Mayor, council members, Krista York, the fiscal manager. Yes, we have a program where we maintain that pipeline. And so the reason we didn't have that July Academy last year is because we had this anomaly from the year where we're like, oh, we're having less separations. When we see the separations start to increase or be more on target, we try to spread it out equally throughout the upcoming years. So we always have the right number of officers coming out right at the time that we need them to correlate with the separations that we see. And so by doing that, it really keeps us staffed, and it really benefits us in many multiple ways.
And just quickly, please understand that officers, most of them, unless the chief has something to do with it, are planning their retirements well in advance and their separations, because there's just a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of effort that they need to anticipate. And so that gives us the lead time to understand how to fill those vacancies. And so now we're able to do that with a lot more precision of timeliness than we have in the years past. And that was one of the reasons we had those numbers so high, like the 780 numbers, because they were actually accounting for the fact that we'd have to have officers in the academy who weren't actually on the street. They were in the academy, but not on the street working.
Mr. Heredia, then Mr. Freeman.
Chief, can you clarify on the shift bid positions, previous slide? Is that 330 mark open positions or filled positions, and what do they go towards?
So 330 is the number of actual officers in patrol taking calls for service.
Actual officers?
Yes.
Okay.
Chief, thanks for your presentation. A couple of questions. Having participated in DROP and with the separation that you have, that these numbers just as you hire for replacements, that just brings you up to par, probably within the organization. So as you identify hot zones and other issues in the community, what are we prepared to do to place more officers on board above the par level that we need? And that might be an answer for Mr. Brady.
And the chief's going to talk.
Okay,
to that. Yeah.
I didn't see a lot of it.
It's coming.
It's coming. And I can wait. That's good, I can wait.
Thank you. Next. So I've talked a lot about I've touted quite a bit our excellence in crime fighting, the fact that we're a very safe city. But I don't want to lull you into a false sense of security. We are still the 36th largest city in the country, and we are still dealing with an urban environment. And it is unfortunate, and it does happen where bad things happen to really good people. But I'll tell you that we are ultra committed and focused, and when those things happen, that we are going to do everything we can to find a perpetrator, arrest them, and take care of the victim. But with that, we do have some challenges associated with our growth. I've explained that our calls for service are going up, and I haven't touched on the geographical considerations, which what I'm really talking about here specifically is the size of our patrol districts. So right now we have 4 patrol districts: Fiesta, which is 15.5 square miles; Central, which is 12 square miles; Red Mountain, which is about 39 square miles; and then Superstition, which is 71 square miles. I'll be frank with you. There is no doubt that we need to have and consider and think about another patrol station that will cut Superstition in half, and it will give us the opportunity to do some realignment with some of the boundaries. I would be remiss if I told you that I can't see where we would want to change the boundaries to those districts on the west side because they're very busy. They're much busier than Superstition is right now, but I have to do something to try and find better balance between the West Valley and the East Valley of our city. And Superstition has grown. I think at the time when the Superstition station was built, and for the population that we had at the time, and the call load that we had at the time, I think that it was right. But we're getting to a point where we need to seriously consider what the future looks like.
Mr. Luna.
Mr. Bautista, so the Superstition station covers Northeast Mesa and Southeast Mesa, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. And because of the growth in that area, there's obviously a need to perhaps look at and identify maybe a northeast site?
Yes. I've touched upon the challenges related to our investigative units and the staffing that it requires. The fact that we've invested heavily on the front-facing police force, but the reality is we still need to ensure that those units in the background have the adequate staffing in order to make sure that we have resolution and closure when we have a serious crime. I think our economic development is not a challenge. It's a good thing, but it does provide challenges in that because of the economic development that I see coming to downtown, that I see developing out in the southeast and northeast, those areas are going to demand more services. The special events in the city of Mesa alone draw thousands and thousands of people. And while they're terrific and they're great, they do require a lot of service from the police department to ensure that everyone's safety is met. And lastly, the mental health demands that we're seeing throughout our community. I touched earlier about the need to ensure that we give folks suffering from mental illness the ability to have the care that they need. Nothing breaks my heart more than to hear a 911 call from a parent or a loved one who's dealing with someone at home who is suffering through those periods. And we get called to try and resolve those things, to try and find them care. And it is becoming increasingly challenging. The next chart is well known to most. It's the population forecasting put together by the Maricopa County Association of Governments. As I look at 2017 and 2018, I feel confident that those numbers are on target, but more to the fact that I feel like in 2020, when the census comes around, we will very likely be in that range of 506,000 residents to our great city. And it brings challenges, as I mentioned earlier, in that our residential areas are growing, our business district, our educational district in the downtown, the special events. All of these are going to cause our organization to stretch ourselves in order to meet the safety and security needs. In downtown, I'll tell you that I envision a combination of bike officers and walking beat officers working in concert with security personnel and ambassadors that help you get around. I think the mission of the officers working in the downtown area along the light rail corridor, it's one of providing safety. It's one of having that feeling that you're going to be okay in that area. But we have challenges in there right now. It's homelessness, it's drug addiction, it's mental illness. And if those three things were on their own separate paths, they would be challenging. But as we know, they're inextricably linked and tied together, which make it even more challenging. I thank goodness that I've got an officer that cares dearly about this issue, and that we have social services in the area that are helping us, and the City of Mesa staff that is working diligently in addressing these problems. But again, I want to make sure that from our perspective, we have an area where if people are coming, if parents are coming and they want to send their kids to school in this area, that they feel like this is a safe area to be. And if a developer is coming into this area and saying, I could envision retail space or a restaurant or an apartment complex here, we want to make it so they can see that, so they can see that vision. I've been a part of something that developed like this, and I've seen the success. And I see it here, and I want to be a part of that. So what do the staffing needs look like? We're forecasting that in 5 years, we would need an additional 72 officers. Now, let me couch that carefully. I am not a slave to a number that is often touted, right? How many officers per 1,000 do you have? And I'll tell you that right now, we're at 1.5. And you see what we're up against. You see the challenges. In order for us to stay at 1.5 with the estimated population growth, we will need 72 additional officers in the next 5 years. But again, I'm talking about maintaining what we have now. I'm talking about ensuring that, or depending on the fact that we can maintain the crime trends that we have seen to date. Now, we know that nationally crime trends have decreased, but that is not always the case in every city. As I mentioned earlier, when compared to the 20 different cities of like size and like police departments, we're at the bottom, which is great. But I don't think that we can continue to say or believe that we can stay at that rate indefinitely. And so that's the reason why I have to ensure that I tell you that 72 officers in the next 5 years is a minimum range that could help us maintain what we have today. And I touched on the importance of looking at superstition in a different way. Superstition, in my mind, can't continue to be 71 square miles. We have to seriously consider the addition of a Northeast station that would effectively break superstition into two. In addition...
Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Thompson.
Chief, thank you for telling us this. So the 72 officers to maintain the levels that we have today, what are you expecting in 5 years as the population does grow? Because, as population grows, I'm sure that the Part 1 crimes will continue to grow as well. So how do you, or what are you looking at staffing needs to not only maintain what we have today, but to meet the demand of tomorrow?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Thompson, I am not like any other police chief or police department that's not going to come and tell you that we don't always need more police officers. But at the same time that I tell you that, I'll tell you that I understand what a large chunk of our budget police and fire take up. And while public safety is a major cornerstone to any community, it's not the only cornerstone. And it is important to ensure that we have balance throughout the city, to ensure that the arts and that public transportation and that parks are vibrant, so that is what makes a strong and vibrant community. And we have that now. But at the same time that I tell you that, I am cognizant of the fact that we will need more personnel in the next 5 years, and we definitely need to be considerate of the fact that the support units going into the future can't stay at the same levels that we're operating at today, simply because we don't know what the crime trends will look like. That is something that through our CompStat process, we look at once a quarter. Every week to week, the districts are looking at their crime trends. But once a quarter, we take a pretty deep dive into what those numbers are doing, if they're going up, if they're trending up or trending down. We're fortunate in that there's been a lot of work in the background at the Mesa Police Department to ensure that we keep a lid on crime. I've demonstrated that to you in comparison to these other cities. We have an amazing system, but even that, I have to say that we have to be careful in our growth and ensure that some of those units in the background, those dealing with folks that are suffering from mental illness, that we have the right number of people to help us deal with that.
Well, and I agree, Chief. I think we have probably one of the best police forces in the nation. But I want to make sure that our men and women also have that life family balance as well. And it's not always we're not always capable of providing that life balance for our men and women. And to me, that's something that's important because that's a stress, not only on the individual, but on the family as well. And doing more with less doesn't really help us. And so I just want to make sure that we're staffed properly to ensure that our men and women can have that life balance as well as continue to fight the crimes that they're facing on a daily basis.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think Mr. Whitaker has a question. No, that wasn't intentional. Yeah. There we go.
Oh, there. Just got to tap it a couple times. I think Kevin broke it with his strong hands. So when it, I forgot my question now. The staff, the new location that you referred to in the northeast station. So I know that in previous presentations we saw heat maps of where the crimes are actually occurring in the city, or I believe that those heat maps actually exist. So when you guys decided to put, or when you say that you need a northeast station, do you look at the heat maps of where the crimes are occurring and then try to place those stations right in the heart of those areas, or how do you go about that process?
So absolutely, we look at where the crime is occurring. That's the reason why when we look at Fiesta and we look at central divisions, they're of a manageable size because that is a densely populated urban environment that requires a lot of services, and a lot of calls for service are generated out of those areas. I recently looked at the differences between those areas and the patrol district on the east side, Superstition, and in some cases we're talking about a difference of 10,000 calls per year. That Superstition had 10,000 fewer calls, 12,000 fewer calls than some of these densely populated areas. But the fact remains that Superstition is very big. I finally had an opportunity to go out there and ride, and I can see where the officers are telling the absolute truth when they talk about having to traverse a district that is that big in order to get to a call for service, especially in an emergency type situation. It is taking them a lot longer. Now, the fact is, I have to rely on or think about that. The fact that we don't have as many emergency calls on the east side, and thank goodness for that. So because of these things, I am allocating and staffing according to where our needs are at the moment. But that area is undoubtedly growing. And while these families are young at the moment and they're not requesting a lot of services, they're going to mature over time, and relationships will change. Drug addiction will come into somebody's life. These children will grow up and start to drive on narrow streets, and so traffic accidents will go up. A lot more calls for service will occur as this area matures. And so by planning now to break apart Superstition and build a Northeast Station, we are positioning ourselves not just for the next 5 years, but for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And so that is why I emphasize the need to carefully look at this request to build a Northeast Station.
Request to build a Northeast Station, or is that your recommendation that we're building a Northeast Station?
Recommendation.
Okay. And I don't mean specifically as it pertains to the entire city geographically, but I say that when you look at the Superstition district, independent of itself, and you look at the heat map of crimes that are occurring, are we in fact trying to target a location for that new police? I'm not doubting the fact that you're trying to break up the district. That's not what I'm questioning. I'm questioning, are we strategically making sure that we're placing the police station within Superstition in the correct place where a heat map shows that the most crimes are?
Right. So unlike the fire model where the fire department responds from a set location and they try to place themselves where the heat map is occurring, a police station is not the same way, because what happens is officers deploy from the station and they're mobile. What is most important for us in that situation is that we don't have such a large area to patrol. We do consider things like ensuring that we try to put it in an area that's not too heavily residential, but that also allows us access to the residents, to neighborhoods, at the same time that we have good accessibility to freeways or major arterials. But I think that's a different consideration than when you're asking about, are we putting police stations where the crime's occurring? Not necessarily, simply because we deploy differently than I think the fire department's model.
You patrol according to the heat maps, I'm assuming.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's, and you also staff your substations and your shifts according to ComStat and your crime model.
And the
Is that
needs.
correct? Yeah. So they have a more dynamic process because they can move their resources around the city. So the amount of officers, I'm assuming, that are on the west side are different than what's in the east side. Part of that, it's not just because every substation gets a specific allocation. They are ability to move those around.
Right. So we deploy officers based on what the need is. So we have more calls for service on the west side, so those stations have more officers. Does that?
Yeah, I guess if your model is different than fire, I just assume, like unrelated, there's a statistic that you're like 80% more likely to get in an accident within 1 mile of your house. It's because you travel so much more within your house, right? But to use that analogy, I would assume that if you placed a police station in the area where the crimes, in the most dense area that crimes are being committed, that the chances of you having an officer in the area that could respond faster because they're always coming and going to their home base. But perhaps I misunderstand how the patrol system works.
So you're not too far off. If you put a police station in a hot zone, there's going to be some effect with that area because there's police officers coming and going from that station. And so you're correct; it will have an impact in that area, but it's one of many components.
If I may, we deploy and assign our officers using the beat system, and those beats are based on the heat map that you talk about and calls for service and whatnot. So once an officer leaves the station, they go to that area, and that's kind of where they're patrolling from. So that puts them more in the vicinity of the crime that's occurring, like what you're discussing.
Sure. I don't need to push any further. On the other topic about Thompson and the stress that's being placed on the officer, or that perceived stress that officers are being overworked, do we have a mandatory overtime type of policy if we're short on police officers, or how does that process work?
So I'll have Commander Cost speak to that. It is not that black and white. We have a staffing level that we strive to attain, and in situations when we fall below that because people have called in sick, then we do call in people to cover for that time frame on overtime.
Good morning. So we call it our minimum staffing or our basic staffing. Sometimes you'll hear terms like critical staffing, but it's basically a basic staffing model that is derived from a variety of formulas and analytics to include calls for service per hour, how many officers it takes to handle a violent crime call compared to a property crime call, throughout the day, how many officers are needed throughout the 24-hour period. And you take those analytics, factor in the human being factor as far as how many officers could be off during a certain day of the week or shift, and that's how we come up with our minimum staffing. If you can't staff to that minimum staffing, yes, there's a variety of ways that we'll staff that officer that's off. It's not always overtime. We've employed a system where we'll borrow or loan from other districts. So for example, a superstition is short an officer for a day shift or a swing shift and they're under that minimum staffing level, they can call Red Mountain, and if they see that they're over their staffing level, they'll take that officer and deploy them over to that other district, give him or her a new call sign, and they'll subsequently work in that district away from where they bid. And so that's our first way that we'll cover that minimum staffing. The other way that we cover minimum staffing is some of these support units that we are struggling with keeping staffed, whether it be traffic or the gang unit or our street crimes officers that were within the division, to have them answer calls for service to avoid paying overtime. And then, yes, we will pay overtime if we can't get any of those other tasks accomplished to get to that minimum staffing level.
Yeah, and I guess my question originates from a comment that Thompson made about the work-life balance, right? Which I think is important because employees that are overworked could be put in a more potentially stressful situation where they may not make the best decision. So I guess I would only ask, is there a metric that we can create, whether that's an overtime metric to determine, or at your recommendation, is there another metric that we could use to determine the work-life balance, to Thompson's point, if officers are in fact facing some form of mandatory overtime to cover labor shortages?
So we have different ways of measuring all this, and we can certainly look at that. But there are also a lot of incentives that we have to make sure that people come to work. And we've been fortunate that the city has provided us some of those opportunities, and we continue to use that. We can tell you that we look at every district to determine how many members are calling in sick, and juxtapose that to the overtime costs and what's it costing us to fund that. So we can easily go back and try to determine what that number looks like and who's being impacted and affected in order to minimize that.
Great. Again, my overall concern is just to make sure that we're not overworking police officers to then put them in situations where they may be stressed out.
And to that point is, I think sometimes we have to be careful because we actually have officers who are asking for more hours and pushing, and we have to make sure we manage that on that side of it too, because it's, the overtime can become, unfortunately for some, if they, it becomes almost like an expectation of so many hours, and so we have to manage that because we need to keep them healthy. And it applies to both sides of public safety. Overtime can be a tool for management, but also for the employees. Sometimes it's an incentive. It helps them earn additional income. But then maybe, I think Councilman Thompson's point too is we have to be careful that it doesn't become overstressing for the individual. And sometimes that's either self-imposed or maybe we need to make sure systematically we're not overburdening those individuals.
Yeah, but even self-imposed, I would say it's still.
No, agreed. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Thank you.
Please continue, Chief.
Thanks. Next slide, we're talking about the staffing needs and sworn specialized positions. And I've talked a lot about this. We're talking about those detectives that are conducting the investigations behind the scenes. They're the ones that help us resolve crimes. And I've also touched on the crisis response team and the importance of having them in order to help us prevent some of these deadly encounters that we've had in the past. Chief Burlingame is going to touch on the mental health related calls.
Good morning. As you know, our response to mental health calls has been one of our major initiatives that we've implemented over the last couple of years. We brought on our crisis response team, fully staffed with 4 members to assist patrol in 2016. As you can see, this chart illustrates the dramatic increase that we've seen over the years in those mental health related calls. In the last 3 years, the calls that we're dealing with, mental health detainers, suicides, and other issues directly related to those that are affected by mental illness have increased by 49%. Additionally, within Maricopa County, we've seen a 49% increase in our seriously mentally ill population over that same time period. They don't have the specific statistics for the impact on Mesa, but we can assume based on the calls that we're seeing and the increase that they have, that we're also seeing that same increase. We've had an increase of 4% over the last year in the committals that we're making to community bridges. And when you look at the mental health providers throughout Maricopa County, 5 of the 8 of the treatment providers have facilities located here in Mesa. As the chief alluded to before, these calls can be very complex in nature, and therefore they can take quite some time to deal with when you're talking about de-escalation and establishing a rapport with not only the individual that we're trying to help, but also with their family, and make sure that they get connected to the right resources. That can be very, very time consuming. We've seen an escalation in the incidents that we're dealing with. Of our critical incidences, about 66% of those are involving those that are mentally ill as a primary driving factor. So we need to continue to focus on this area. So one of the things that we're asking for is the addition of 4 more positions to our crisis response team. That will help us spread out our response across the city. We'll be able to provide broader coverage during the week and at various hours to help have a specialized group of people that can go out there and interact with these individuals, as well as taking a proactive approach to them so that we can go out and connect with them and engage mental health practitioners before it ever becomes a call for service and before they ever come into the criminal justice system. And it will be safer for them and safer for our officers at the end of the day.
Chief Burlingame, a moment ago, the chief, there's a couple of numbers that I've written down here that are just screaming off the page. 75 is one, 72, thank you. The other is 25 to 35. When I started this job 3 years ago, I was shocked with this statistic that you gave us that we had 2,500 calls, suicide calls a year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 3 years later, it's gone from 2,500 to 3,500.
Correct.
Suicide calls per year. And so a moment ago, you said 4 additional officers to specialize in the special response unit that you've created. Is that in this next budget year, or is?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
So next, I'm going to talk about, earlier I mentioned the excellent balance that we have between sworn officers and professional staff. And so in the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about the professional staff that's assigned to patrol, and their focus is ensuring that they take the low-level calls for service in order to free up our patrol officers to take those crimes that are in progress and to have that visibility of a police officer in a neighborhood, of a police officer in a neighborhood meeting. So the first one that comes to mind is the police service officers. They're the ones that take the traffic accidents, they do point control, they do drug testing, they take found property calls. A lot of calls are taken off the board by these specialized non-sworn staff personnel out in the field. With respect to Mr. Whitaker's question last year about what we were going to do about our response to traffic accidents. So this year, we are actively looking at alternative ways to handle traffic accidents, because while our PSOs, our public service officers, take traffic accidents, they can't take all the traffic accidents. And so our police officers are still responding to traffic accidents. So in response to that, we're looking at alternative ways to handle folks involved in low-level collisions, non-injury collisions, non-blocking collisions. The next is a key component to how we stay on top of property crimes. Our civilian support investigation specialists are highly trained to take the property crimes. They're the ones that take fingerprints, DNA, and conduct thorough investigations. They take that information and those that evidence that they pick up from those crime scenes, take it over to a crime lab, processes that information, and from there is how we begin the process of identifying those folks involved in thievery. And that's why this is one of the key components that sets us apart from other cities when it comes to resolving property crimes. So in this budget cycle, we're asking for 2 additional positions to help us with the investigative services. Next, I wanted to talk about how we get ready for the future, and I've touched on it before. I talked about the importance of ensuring safety to our downtown, a combination of police and private security and ambassadors to provide that feeling that if you're in the downtown area, if you're in the corridor, if you're taking light rail, that you feel safe. And that is important to me from east to west, so that we have balance again between the density of our west side and our population growth on the east side. So how are we going to do some of this? I'll tell you that we are partnering with our community. We are working with organizations to attract young adults to the field of public service. And we feel that we have the opportunity to create a recruiting and hiring pipeline for our future. This year alone, we're going to start a junior police academy, as well as a parents police academy. And the focus of a parents police academy is to bring attention to the contemporary issues of parenting. I don't know if some of you are familiar with the term vaping, but it's taking the place of cigarette smoke, and it is dangerous. But it's occurring at a fast pace throughout our juvenile population. Facebook is in the news, and there are a whole host of areas where we want to help parents understand what's occurring with their kids. In addition to that, our youth leadership programs, the Aspire program and the Mesa program, have had huge success. And these are ways that we want to continue to foster an opportunity for young people to see a career in service. And it'd be great if they become members of the Mesa Police Department or the Mesa Fire Department, but all in all, if you have young folks that are coming into the profession of service, I think we all win. Next is a proposal for a patrol officer program. And what this would be is an opportunity for a younger police officer to enter into a position of a level 1. It would be, for example, the compensation package of an additional, and here we've kind of rounded it up. So level 1 would be $1,200, level 2, $1,700, and level 3 would be the highest compensation. For a level 3 police officer, a senior level 3 police officer, what comes with that is the opportunity to step in and assist the squad sergeant to squad supervisor with some of the administrative tasks that are part and parcel to a sergeant's daily duties, but some that we believe could easily be handled by a senior officer or an officer that has attained that experience and can handle those assignments. We are actively looking at what this will look like. There's a committee that's studying it, and I should have the initial results by the end of this month.
Yes, Jeremy.
I don't understand, what is this incentive for? Sorry, I didn't understand.
So the incentive is aimed at keeping people that are interested in doing patrol work in patrol, versus always thinking like, I don't like it here, I'm gonna try and move to another area and do something else. So this is an incentive to essentially try to keep folks that like patrol in patrol and reward them with recognition, official recognition. It would be in some type of a chevron that sets them apart from the regular officers, and then additional duties that come with that. So it wouldn't be automatically given. There would be some type of challenge for it, so that we don't create an environment where people just assume that if you have enough time on, you get this assignment or you get this position.
So patrol officer is almost sort of frowned upon in your organization, your department. Am I understanding that correctly?
I would not say that. I wouldn't characterize that our officers in patrol are frowned upon. I think that is a proud group of individuals that serve the best.
Councilman, I think it's a way we recognize that it's wonderful when police officers have enough time and demonstrate competencies they can promote up, and that's good. But there's only so many positions to promote up to, and the experience of the opportunity to have experienced, tenured police officers out on the streets on patrol, we think is very valuable. And so we kind of challenge the chief to think of how can we create ways that's not just based on tenure, but it's based on competencies and responsibilities, so that a patrol officer can see that there's value without having to necessarily promote up, but still be a patrol officer, have additional responsibilities, but also be compensated with some kind of incentive to continue at that level. So that's, I don't know, Chief, is that clear?
I apologize. I think I chose poor words in my last statement. But officers are always looking, I guess, to expand and go further and more beyond. This helps keep them in the, I'm assuming we're struggling with keeping people in the patrol. program?
So what happens is, I think the way that Mr. Brady described it is that there are only so many positions that are available to promote up to or to go to a special assignment. And this is a way to reward those that are in patrol, enjoying what they're doing, and to keep them there.
Got it. Thank you.
In the next slide, we're talking about the reporting efficiencies that we're planning in the coming year. We're going to expand our online reporting from the current 6 to an additional 12 more categories of online reporting. What we are expecting is likely an additional 2,000 hours that will be diverted away from patrol. One of the first things I thought of when I first got here is like, well, how many reports do we have online? And it didn't take long for me to find out that there was already a committee that was working on it. And here within the next few months, we'll be able to kick it off. The e-citation was another area of concern when I first got here. I found that officers are handwriting police reports, handwriting citations. So the chances of something going wrong out in the field, a windy day, a noisy day, on the side of the road, an officer inputs the wrong information, not only does that impact us administratively, because then that has to be fixed through the criminal justice system, but that also impacts the person that receives the citation. Heaven forbid that we put the wrong court date or the wrong charge or the wrong name, because then that is troublesome for the person that got the ticket. So through the eSite program, we're going to be able to streamline a lot of that process, and in the meantime, save something like 3,000 plus hours, equivalent to one and a half full-time equivalent positions. Next is the smartphones. There are so many things that we can do with a smartphone. I don't know if you know, but in the current time now, our police officers are using their personal phones in order to do some of the work that they do day in and day out. And in our litigious society, I myself wouldn't imagine, I don't think you would either, envision that a smart attorney would pull your phone into an in-camera inspection to determine whether or not their client's case is on your phone. So that is the situation that we find ourselves in today, and I want to make sure that we protect our officers from that. In addition to that, with a smartphone in their hand, the officers are going to be able to have all the call information at the palm of their hand. They'll be able to take tape statements. They'll be able to photograph evidence on the spot versus waiting for a field camera to come and take a picture, sometimes 15, 20, 45 minutes later. So there are a lot of efficiencies built into providing our officers with a smartphone. And lastly, dictation services speak for themselves. Just the ability to dictate a report versus handwriting is evident. Chief Burlingame is going to talk about the private jail project.
We're about 3/4 of the way through the year since we started the private jail contract back in July. So we thought we'd give you an assessment of kind of where we've been, and how things are looking. We've identified several factors to look at to evaluate the effectiveness of the private jail contract. The first one is inspections. We go out on a weekly basis and we'll do either unannounced or announced inspections of the facility. And every time we go out there, we'll talk to different staff members. We may talk to an inmate. We'll look at different areas. Overall, those inspections are excellent. We've not seen any significant issues at all. Every once in a while, we'll come across something minor which can be immediately resolved. We've also looked at the quality of service that CoreCivic is providing, and we've been very happy with that. They provided good medical services for our inmates, and they also have an excellent mental health program. They have a clinic right there on site. I've actually been there, and I've seen the inmates in there getting treatment. If someone goes into a crisis because of a mental health issue, they have specific practitioners there that can help them. They have a specific area where they can go to kind of work through it and get the treatment that they need. All our Mesa inmates are housed separately from everyone else. There's no interaction with other federal inmates at that facility. The rooms are all roomy. You can see a picture of it on the slide. The facilities have always been cleanly. We get a lot of feedback from the inmates that are there, that they're very satisfied with the size of the facility, the availability of the tables and the beds and the overall roominess of that facility. With regards to the staff, they've been very responsive to our needs. Whenever we've reached out to them to talk about process improvement or to assist us with any issues that we're seeing, they readily engage with us, and we're able to very quickly come up with some solutions. They've helped us with expanding the options for visitation and expanding the options for transportation, and we continue to work with them to ensure that there's efficiencies in our inmates being able to get to their court hearings and whatnot on time. Which brings us to transportation. Typically, we provide 2 transports per day during the week. We've been using 3 off and on the weekends. Those have been timely. It allows us a lot more control over the coordination of when inmates are getting transported to and from our facility. It's also allowed us to control the court process a lot better. So we're able to ensure that our inmates are getting to the required court hearings in a very timely manner. They're able to resolve their issues a lot more efficiently. We've also worked with CoreCivic and the court system here in Mesa to make sure that the folks that need to go to Rule 11 hearings are being transported there, and we've been able to consolidate those and just provide 1 transport up here, which has saved time for not only our staff in the holding facility, but also for the patrol officers. Overall,
Excuse me, Chief. Mr. Luna has a question.
Chief, I have a question on your transportation. What about families visiting their family members at CoreCivic? Has that been an issue, or have you been able to
It hasn't
offer
been an
relief?
issue. There is an area there set aside for visitation where they can go and they can do that. We've also allowed telephonic visitation. They set up a room, an area there specifically that can be private for either phone visitation or like teleconferencing, video visitation as well, that they can use, where they can just come down to the main station and then we can hook them up on a computer there rather than driving all the way out to Florence. The customer service, that's one of the things that we've looked at, how to improve that for the families, make sure that we're providing information. We get a lot of phone calls. We're updating our website to make sure that they have information on where to go to find their family members, when they're going to be released, that sort of thing. And that's an ongoing process. And then lastly, we allow them the opportunity to fill out a survey. It's voluntary. Overall, those surveys are overwhelmingly positive. If you pull up the next slide, I know several of you have heard about this and asked me about this one. This is by far the best one that we've got. This is the one where they rated us 5 stars on Yelp for the CoreCivic contract. Every once in a while, we get some negative ones. We address those with CoreCivic, but like I said, overwhelmingly, they are very positive. And I've actually fielded some phone calls from defense attorneys from other cities asking if their inmates could come over and process through Mesa to go down to CoreCivic, which of course we don't allow, but word's getting out about the quality of the service and the facility there at CoreCivic. Some of the challenges that we're working through are with the work release program and the self-surrender program. That previously was handled by MCSO, and now we're handling that in concert with CoreCivic. It's dramatically increased the volume of inmates that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis that are processing in and out of our facility. On average, we see about 28 work release inmates per day coming through our facility, and one of the issues is that number can fluctuate fairly widely from day to day. And we have to process them in and out whenever they go out for work release or come back in for work release. One of the issues that we're facing is not everyone has a job where they're working 9 to 5, and so that we can just address that schedule. And we've accommodated everyone with regards to what their work schedule is so that they can still stay productively employed while they're serving their sentence. So we've had to make accommodations to allow people to actually spend the night in our facility. If you have someone that has, say, a landscaping job or some kind of manufacturing type of job where they might have to be to work at 4 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we have to make adjustments, and they end up being housed quite a bit at our facility because of that. Self-surrender.
Yes, Mr. Thompson.
Chief, thank you for talking about this, and because I know that we had asked for an update on this as well. When you talk about the work release program and the number of inmates that are coming back into our jails on a daily basis. How is that impacting what our officers are doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's a DUI or a trespass or something of that nature that we have to book into our cells, take somebody into custody and book them into our cells prior to their arraignment. Is there a very big impact on what we're? I guess I'm trying to get a feel for, if you have 28 people that are coming into our cell, our holding cells aren't that large. And so capacity-wise, what does that mean for our officers on the street that are taking folks into custody and trying to book them into holding cells as well?
Initially, it was a significant issue because our Mesa police officers are on average booking 45 to 50 inmates per day, and those are the ones that are getting put in the cells. Typically, when our work release folks come in, they're not being held in a cell. They're being processed and then immediately placed on a bus to go back to Core Civic, or they're being dropped off from the bus, processed through our facility, and immediately going out to a mode of transportation to get to their job. So we've looked at it. We've already made some adjustments in our process so that we can control the number of inmates that are coming in at one point in time. They might stay on the bus and we'll bring in 5 at a time. That way we can continue to process any other prisoners that are in the facility, and it allows us to make sure that we don't have a volume that creates a safety issue with other inmates or with our officers in the facility. And we continue to work with Core Civic on what the best way to handle this is, looking at other facilities to process them through and actually operate work release out of with their help with some staffing. And that issue is ongoing at this point in time.
Thank you. I appreciate you talking about that because, not only is our officer safety imperative, but I think, at the end of the day, the inmates are Mesa citizens, and I want to make sure that they are safe as well. So thank you for mentioning that too.
Welcome. We also are dealing with the self-surrender program now. That volume fluctuates. It can be as few as 1 or 2 a day. We've had upwards of 10 or more per day, particularly on the weekends. So again, that increases our volume, and they can show up pretty much at any time. So they'll just show up to our facility, ring the bell, and then we'll try to get them in to get them processed quite quickly. So again, we continue to look at processing options for them and work with the court to try to streamline that process. The last challenge we have is staffing. This is a condition that was pre-existing before we ever entered into the Core Civic contract. We've been understaffed. We've had our supervisors actually working the line, helping with process bookings and whatnot, which has prevented them.
Excuse me, Chief, by staffing, we're referring to detention officers.
Detention officers,
okay.
Yes. So we're trying to get the supervisors off the line so that they can do more of their administrative and leadership oversight of our personnel to ensure that processes are being followed and we're in compliance with policy and ensure the overall safety of the facility and those that are in the facility. So we've identified the need for 6 additional positions. 5 of those are detention officer positions, and 1 is an administrative aide to help with the tremendous administrative workload within that facility, the processing of all the booking paperwork, the phone calls that need to be made, working with the court on court dates, release times, and things like that. Adding these positions is going to provide better all-over safety and accountability of not only the detention officers, but the inmates that are in that facility, and make sure that we're doing required welfare checks, monitoring cameras, things like that. Using some of the savings that we're seeing from the jail contract, we're able to obtain those positions at a cost of about $175,000 because of the inordinate amount of money that we were spending on overtime. We were looking at about $200,000 in overtime over the last several years because of those staffing shortages, and that should be eliminated and make our facility a lot more effective and, like I said, a lot more safe. This slide shows you the fiscal impact since July. You will notice that the figures for the inmates being housed at Core Civic from July through September are a little bit lower. That's because of the carryover from MCSO. We still had during those months a large number of inmates that were still being housed at MCSO and fulfilling their sentences that they had there. Most of that has been alleviated now, and now you're starting to see some true numbers. This gives you the fiscal impact through February because that's what the billing statements that we have that have been currently reconciled. Due to the lower booking costs and housing costs that we're seeing through Core Civic, right now we're on track for about a $1.7 million savings over what we were seeing when we were using MCSO.
Question.
Thank you.
So Assistant Chief, thank you. For the previous slide on challenges, are these additional costs that we're incurring for the program that we're seeing more as far as work release program, volume of participants? So are these additional costs that we didn't project when we went into the Core Civic contract that we now have to pay?
No, those costs they're completely unrelated. Regardless of whether or not we had entered into the Core Civic contract, we still would have had to hire these additional positions.
Okay. Is there any other costs that, so the 1.7, the costs here are per inmates, right? As far as costs, what it would, from the sheriff's office to the Core Civic, just transportation-wise, whatever covers an inmates to be housed at Core Civic, that's the parallel kind of analysis here, right?
Correct.
As far as you're showing.
Correct.
Is there other costs that we're not adding here that
No.
we had?
No, they're all reflected
Okay.
here.
They're all reflected here? Okay.
Okay, that was a question I had. So that, I think we're spending like $35,000 a month on the transportation aspect of this, and you folded that into the total monthly Core Civic expense number, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I was a little surprised earlier, I assumed the additional detention officers that we recently talked about were something that was necessitated by the unanticipated work release traffic that was going in and out of our holding facility. And in fairness, it ought to be added to the expense of the Core Civic program. But are you telling me that that's not the case, that we were actually understaffed
We've been
regardless,
understaffed
and we
for
would have
quite some
hired those
time.
folks
Yes.
anyway?
Mhm.
Okay.
But these savings have made it a lot easier to make the decision to add those. We've already added, right?
We're in the hiring
They're in
process.
the hiring process. So we already get, because we recognize this was I think in fairness, the need was there previously. I would say the work release program exacerbated the need.
It increased the stress levels.
Stress level. So with that, we made the decision to go ahead and authorize the positions to be filled. The good news from that, we recognize because of the savings we were having in the police department budget from the Core Civic contract, that would not have a negative impact on the overall budget. So I don't think it's fair to say that, there is certainly, there's some associated cost because of that work release program that we're having to, those resources are being able to cover, but we did need these positions before, so.
So the bottom line, based on what we've seen so far, we feel that the private contract has been a success. It is saving money. We want to continue to evaluate this through the end of the fiscal year, continue to look at areas where we can improve our processes and make sure that we're effective with the contract and with our holding facility that we have. Any questions?
Mayor Council, just one quick thing. I heard this from our presiding judge. He has indicated that this arrangement is much more beneficial in getting individuals processed much quicker than previously, that we're able to get the individuals back in front of the judge, back to the court, much more expeditiously before. And so individuals, before, it might have taken more than a day or two to get somebody from wherever they were in the county system. And it's just because of the size. It's not, it's just so. Here, he's saying, literally, we're having individuals who are able to serve just the time they need to serve and get them processed and out of the holding facilities, out of the jail sooner. And so it's made it much more efficient for the courts to have this arrangement also.
Thank you. So the anticipation is to come back again at the end of a year for another report. And now remind me, that I think it was a 3-year contract that we had initially entered into, or was it renewable at the end of 1 year? Or
It's renewable year to year after that 3-year period.
so after this first year, we will.
Three.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're committed to 3 years and then.
Yes, and then it's renewable
Year to
year to
year
year.
after that.
But we can provide another report to council.
Okay,
How far into it are we?
3/4 of the way, 9 months.
So,
yeah.
3 months or so, maybe at the end of the summer. How would that be if we just, maybe in the fall when we come back, give another report?
I would think when you have 12 months worth of data, that might be a good time to, and I don't realize that won't be exactly on the year anniversary. As you indicate, we're looking at February numbers now. So I'd be curious to look
Okay.
at it when you have 12 months worth of data.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, last but not least, we have a couple of financial slides wanted to review with you. This first slide, what you're looking at is our 5-year expense trends for the police department. What you'll see is that there's a gradual incline on that year after year, which is not surprising considering approximately 85% of our budget covers our personal cost, our personal services budget, of which 60% is sworn. And so really that increase you're seeing year over year is due to the increased pension rates that we have seen for many years going on end now. From 2013 to 2014 up to this current fiscal year, we've had a 75% increase in our pension rates from 31.21% to 54.86%. So that's really what's driving the incline you're seeing on the cost. The second slide represents a snapshot in time as far as by our overall bureaus, where we are looking to land for the current year compared to budget, compared to last year, and then the proposed budget for next fiscal year. We are expected to come in under budget for the current fiscal year, primarily due to our private jail contract. And then one thing that's notable is that you'll see for the proposed budget for 18-19, it's actually less. And that is because we actually have a decrease by 4.3% on the public safety pension retirement system rates for next year. So those savings are being reflected in next year's proposed budget.
Mayor?
Increase in the expected forecast.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Thompson, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. On the proposed budget fiscal year 18-19, the Operations Bureau seems to take quite a significant downturn. Is that what you're saying is the PSPRS piece, or is that more in the administrative services?
No, Councilmember Thompson, you're right. It is for that pension savings we're anticipating seeing next year. Since our Operations Bureau is heavily staffed with sworn, those savings are being reflected within those numbers. And with that.
And thank you. With that, we conclude our presentation, and I'll take your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Freeman.
Thanks, Chiefs. One of the things I just want to, going through my mind with your presentation is, I applaud you for the overhires and anticipation for drop and separation, regardless when that happens. And as you anticipate future hires, I think as a city, I appreciate you being proactive and getting people in line. And it takes, you say, 11 months for a police officer from initial hiring through all the academies and FTO to get on board. And I think we have areas, as you know, you've participated with me in several town halls. People really want to meet those patrol officers. And I really feel that whenever we can increase our patrol staffing within limits that allows officers to meet the needs for calls for service is very important and critical in our community, because they're the boots on the ground. And I appreciate the incentive pay component as I've been thinking about that for patrol officers. With any crew, you have the informal leader within a squad or an area. I know that some of the new hires may feel more comfortable talking to an informal leader in their squad versus their sergeant or lieutenant. So I appreciate looking into that and giving those officers some incentive to remain on patrol, because I know some officers may choose never to promote and they enjoy what they're doing. And that's great, because that's what we need, is that experience on the ground. Siri's talking to
Yeah,
me.
she's infiltrating everywhere.
So with that said, I would just ask that you continue to look at our patrol staffing in the districts. And when you talked about a new district in the northeast part, or a new station and a central district, are you talking districts and stations as the same language, or is a district different than a station?
The same. It's the same.
They're the same?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So thank you for your presentation. And again, I would just, as you say, 72 officers over the next 5 years, it may be more than that.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think our crews out there really need, is knowing that we are protecting them, wanting them to be safe, and make good decisions in the field. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, Mr. Whitaker.
I have one comment. Chief Batista, I know this is your first year here, and I see you constantly engaged in the community. So I just want to say, I think you're doing an excellent job, and I think that your leadership through example is echoed throughout the community. So I appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
I'd like to say amen to that. I think many of us went to the event about a week or two ago where we installed the new police administrators. And that was an inspiring event to attend, because the bio of each of those individuals, many of whom are in the room, was read, and a brief description of their work history and their education and their qualifications, and it was extremely impressive. So Chief, you and those who are with you are I can't compliment you enough of the quality of people that we have in your department, and you and your assistant chiefs and the commanders and the lieutenants and the sergeants that we met at that event. I was just astounded at the quality of the people that we have, so thank you. And that's reflected in the great statistics that you shared with us, what a great safe city we are. We're an outstanding department, and the thing I like is that we're getting better, because of course we're going to make mistakes. But what I enjoy and appreciate about the Mesa Police Department is you learn from them, things get better. Again, the staggering statistic that 3 years ago we were responding to 2,500 suicide calls a year, now it's 3,500. Something's wrong there. I assume it might be tied to the opioid epidemic. I don't know. I know you've talked a lot about mental health and the need that you have to respond, to maybe change the way that we respond to the calls. I know a few years ago we changed the name of the fire department to the Mesa Fire and Medical. I wonder if we need to change the name to Mesa Police and Mental Health. And that's not really a joke. Yeah. I mean, if you look at when you get a 911 call, 9 out of 10 times, what's it going to be? The opportunities I've had with these other gentlemen to go on ride-alongs, I was struck by the fact that all of the calls that I participated in had as their root cause a mental health issue in one way or another.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. And you just reminded me of something I really should add, and I think that this is important with respect to mental health. One of the ways that we aim to divert some of those 911 calls that we're receiving now is through a triage system that we're going to develop in our communications center. And the focus of that will be to, in every instance, when we can divert a 911 call from someone suffering from mental illness, if we can divert that call to an actual clinician that'll be online and ready to take those calls, then we're going to be immediately available to provide somebody the services they need from an expert. There's still going to be situations where we're going to have to respond on those calls, but our effort in that arena is to hopefully divert some of the calls that we're responding to, those 3,500 calls that we're going on, to actually somebody who went to school for that and knows how to handle those things firsthand. But there'll still be calls where we'll have to respond in person.
I think the question that I have that reverberates from your presentation might be one more for Mr. Brady. 72 new FTEs that are public safety qualified on a different pension system. That is a huge financial commitment. When we build a building, it's a one-time cost and it's paid for and we walk away from it. When we hire an employee, particularly a public safety employee, you get 20 years of paying a salary and benefits, 30 years of a pension, And it goes on in perpetuity. And then at the end of that, at the end of retirement, you have to, of course, replace that person with another person of a similar financial commitment. So it's not a one-time, you know, let's bite the bullet and buy 72 new police officers. This is the new normal. And as Mr. Freeman indicated, 72 likely will understate what we actually need to do over that period of time. So, Mr. Brady, that's not a few $1 million. That's not even tens of millions of dollars. It's a lot more than that.
It's a big number. It's more than, obviously, in this budget. You know, one of the reasons we asked the chief to kind of get the longer term perspective, because what we can provide even in this budget will be just a fraction of what that might be. And it's really not addressing the longer term issue that the council has in front of you. You know, we've run all kinds of numbers in the past about what it would take to support not only these positions, and it's a combination of not only the sworn, but you've got to have the other support staff, the administrative support behind it. You have all the equipment, the vehicles and other radios that come with those positions, and so it continues to add up. And so, you know, even on an annual basis, I think something like this number would probably be close to $13–15 million in what we've seen in the past annually to be able to sustain. At the time, you know, it would take a few years to bring this many positions on, and frankly, I think if the presumption is that there has to be, that we're also staffing up for another substation in the Northeast Mesa, then that we'd have to have the capital to build that also. So there's a lot of pieces here, but even just on the operating side, you know, somewhere between $13 and $15 million, I'm estimating right now, would probably be a number that we'd have to get fairly close to, and that would be all inclusive, not just the positions, but the equipment and everything else that would go with it. And so, and whereas today we may be talking about $1.5 million, $2 million at the most that we could allocate for additional positions in the budget if we were to go forward in this year.
So the handful of positions that were talked about a moment ago having to do with the mental health, the additional mental health qualified officers, that's incorporated in the proposed budget, and we've made that.
Well, yeah, it could be. We've talked about the possibility if, you know, council wanted to look at additional resources that could be packaged with other groups, but we could accommodate a handful. I think we said 2 or 3 or 4 positions in this year's budget. Some have sworn, some of these being the civilian positions that we talked about. The detention officers, we've already accommodated. I mean, they show up in the budget, but because of the savings and the core civic jail costs, we're able to get those funded right away.
Well, and I know we're getting a similar presentation from our fire department on Monday, so I guess the drawing conclusions we can maybe put off for, well, we need to add that to this discussion as well. So, yeah. But at some point, I think we're going to turn to Mr. Brady and say, is the pie big enough to hire 72 new police officers over the next 5 years? And in addition to whatever, I'll be interested to see what Chief Camelli's request is on Monday. But we're going to have to figure this out.
Question, Chief. Are we looking at, I recently took a tour of the telecoms, both fire and police. Great work there. Are we looking at some of the costs I heard there's overtime being run there. Are we looking at the costs? And you mentioned the triage system to hire more people at those centers to support kind of the costs for service that are coming in at a higher rate from the previous years.
So this is National Telecommunicators Week, and rightfully so. They shouldn't just be recognized this week, but every day, because they're the folks behind the scenes, again, those people behind the scenes that ensure that those calls get answered. And it is an extremely difficult and tough and trying position. It takes months of training before they're released on their own to take these calls and to dispatch police officers, et cetera. So what we are experiencing right now is turnover. And we're in the midst of ongoing hiring to ensure that we get our staffing levels back to where they need to be. But in the interim, you're correct. We are expending overtime in order to fill those positions while we bring new staff on board. That is an aging infrastructure that is out there, and that is also a part of our overall requests of areas that over time need to be improved upon. And we have made great strides towards that end as new equipment is going to be funneled in that direction here in this coming year. So that is a great start. But we have other challenges related to infrastructure, HVAC, to that building. It's an older building, and once we get those modifications in place, I mean, we feel that we can be there for the next 20 years.
Mr. Luna.
Thank you, chiefs and staff, for your wonderful presentation. I appreciate you continuing to work and do outreach in some of our minority communities. That's very essential to get a pulse of what's happening in this community. So please continue on those efforts. Are you hearing anything relative to school safety based on what happened in Parkland? Is that something that you're looking at as well?
Yes. So in response to Parkland and Las Vegas, the Mesa Police Department engaged in a year-long training effort in order to deal with the issue of mass casualties. For the first time ever, the police department and the fire department are going to train along one another in response to a mass casualty event, where before, in our early days, firefighters did not go into an area where there was still some active shooting going on. In the future, and what this training will take us to is a stage where firefighters will go in with police escort into areas that are not completely safe, where there's still some activity afoot, but where we've established at least some type of a safe zone in order to begin the process of evacuating victims out of that area and treating them. So this is the first year that we've trained this way. I will tell you that with respect to our school resource officers, I feel so fortunate, and as a community, we should feel fortunate that our 14 school resource officers have been training in active shooter situations for at least the last 5 years. This is interesting because next to our SWAT team, our school resource officers are some of the most highly trained individuals when it comes to active shooting. And that is not due to me, that is due to the foreplanning and thought of the chiefs and the predecessors before me that thought about this. And so that, I believe, is outstanding. I trust that in our officers, we will never see a situation like Parkland where they hesitate to go in. Our officers are trained and prepared to secure the safety of our schools.
If I might add, we're also looking at the front end of prevention efforts. We have a good working relationship with the school system itself, so we're working between that school system, our SROs, and then our intel unit and our crisis response team on threat assessments and mitigation strategies as well.
Thank you for asking that question, Mr. Luna. That was something we needed to hear about, so thank you. Other questions, council?
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I'd like to echo my colleagues. I think you guys have done a tremendous job. The times they are changing. Policing is not what it was 5 years ago, 20 years ago. It's more difficult and it's different. And we all recognize that. And you guys do a tremendous job of keeping our community safe. I just want to make sure that we continue, that our citizens continue to feel safe, knowing that if they call 911, that we're going to have an officer respond. And so thank you for all that you do, and thank your men and women for all that they do. And on behalf of the citizens, really appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. We appreciate you. This is a work in progress, and we'll figure this out. But thank you for your good presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
The next item on our agenda for this meeting is item 3, to acknowledge receipt of minutes of board and committees. Thank you, Mr. Luna and Mr. Freeman. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Kevin, did you vote on that?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Any opposed? The next agenda item is item 4, to hear reports on meetings and conferences attended. Council, anything you'd like to share with us? Okay, hearing none, Mr. Brady, can you remind us of the schedule for future meetings?
Yes, Mayor, we have a busy weekend. First Friday, this Friday, April 13th, from 7 to 11 is the annual Beer and Bones fundraiser at the Arizona Museum of Natural History. Saturday, April 14th, from 8 a.m. to noon is the Household Hazardous Waste Collection event. This will be at the Center Street facility, so invite everyone to come and dispose of their household hazardous waste. And then that same day, April 14th, we will have from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. is Celebrate Mesa. This will be at Pioneer Park. It's a free event. Invite everybody out for a lot of carnival rides, entertainment, and food trucks. And council, we will have our next study session. Council meeting will be Monday, April 16th. We're going to start at 4:30. We do have the fire department presentation that day also. Thank you.
Thank you. It will be a very busy weekend. One other event that I've been thinking about is this. It's tomorrow. We have the Tier Pro Series swim event where we get the world's best swimmers out at Skyline Pool. Katie Ledecky, best swimmer in the world, will be there. So if you're a swim fan, that should be fun out at Skyline High School. Council, anything else to share with us? If not, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
Aye.